Introduction. The Southern Poverty Law Center, founded in 1971 in Montgomery, Alabama, by Morris Dees and Julian, positioned itself as a bulwark against racial injustice, particularly through landmark civil suits against the Ku Klux Klan and other violent white supremacist groups in its early decades. Under an anarcho-capitalist, radical objectivist, and agorist lens, which prioritizes voluntary exchange, individual rights grounded in reason and reality, per Ayn Rand's emphasis on objective epistemology and ethics, private property and non-aggression and counter-economic resistance to state coercion, the SPLC exemplifies a parasitic pseudo-private entity that weaponizes moral signaling to extract resources while undermining the very principles of rational individualism and free association it claims to defend. Recent revelations from the U.S. Department of Justice indictment on April 21st, 2026, provide concrete evidence of systemic deception, turning what was long suspected into documented allegations of fraud. This analysis examines the organization's history, operational model, the latest DOJ charges, and why it functions as a criminal enterprise in spirit and practice, even if the legal outcome remains pending. Historical context and ideological critique. From an objectivist standpoint, the SPLC core flaws lies in the rejection of objective standards for hate. Rand's philosophy demands concepts tied to perceptual reality and logical consistency, rights derived from man's nature as a rational being, protected through voluntary cooperation and retaliatory force only against initiators of violence. The SPLC, by contrast, deploys floating abstractions of hate untethered from specific criminal acts. Its hate map and reports label organizations based on ideological disagreement, often mainstream conservative, Christian, or libertarian groups, without requiring evidence of initiated force, fraud, or incitement. These smears individuals exercising free speech and association equating dissent with existential threat. Such tactics erode the epistemological foundation of rights. If hate is subjective and expandable by fiat, then any unpopular view becomes punishable by social and financial ostracism, enforced not by objective law, but by donor-funded narrative control. Anarcho-capitalists in the Rothbardian tradition view this as a private tyranny enabled by state-adjacent privileges. Nonprofits, like the SPLC, enjoy tax exemption status, shielding them from full market accountability. Donors, often wealthy progressives seeking moral absolution, funnel millions into organization that amplifies state power, e.g., feeding intelligence to the FBI and DOJ under prior administrations while evading scrutiny. This creates a feedback loop. Exaggerating threats justify more funding, which sustains the threat narrative. True defense against violence belongs to private arbitration, insurance, and security firms operating in a free market, not a centralized watchdog that profits from perpetual crisis. Agorist, emphasizing counter-economics and withdrawal from state-controlled markets, see the SPLC as the antithesis, a gray-to-black market operator in the charity sector that uses deception, a form of fraud, to accumulate capital for ideological enforcement. Agorism rejects the participation in statist institutions. The SPLC actively collaborates with them, training prosecutors and shaping enforcement priorities, while its own operation allegedly involved concealment and misallocation of funds. Long-standing critiques predate 2026. The SPLC faced internal scandals, including the 2019 departure of co-founder Morris Dees amid sexual harassment allegations and reports of a hostile workplace disproportionately affecting black employees. Financially, it amassed a massive endowment, hundreds of millions, while spending most modestly on direct legal aid, prioritizing fundraising and education that often target nonviolent groups. Critics documented its hate group designations, inflating numbers by counting chapters or loose affiliations, disproportionately focusing on the right while downplaying left-wing extremism like Antifa violence. This asymmetry reveals not objective monitoring, but selective enforcement aligned with cultural left priors. The April 2026 revelations, DOJ indictment details. Over the last 2 weeks, as of late April 2026, the most significant development has been the federal grand jury indictment in Montgomery, Alabama, charging the SPLC with 11 counts, 6 of wire fraud, 4 of bank fraud, false statements to a federally insured bank, and 1 of a conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering. Prosecutors allege that between 2014 and 2023, the SPLC secretly funneled over $3 million in donor funds to at least 8 individuals affiliated with violent extremist groups, including factions of the Ku Klux Klan, Aryan Nation, and the National Socialist Party of America. These payments were routed through fictitious entities and shell accounts to conceal their nature. The organization publicly solicited donations to fight these groups while allegedly paying their members for information without disclosing this to donors. One example cited a leader involved in planning the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville reportedly received approximately $270,000 over 8 years. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche described it as manufacturing racism to justify its existence, with the SPLC using donor money to profit off Klansmen. FBI Director Kash Patel called it a massive fraud operation. The SPLC shut down the informant program, but maintains the payment were for valuable intelligence shared with law enforcement, denying fraud and framing the charges as political retaliation under the current administration. Some donors told media they implicitly supported aggressive tactics, but this does not negate alleged misrepresentations and solicitations. Legal experts have raised skepticism about the indictment's strength, noting challenges in proving intent to defraud. Wire fraud requires a scheme to deprive victims of money via false pretenses, and that payments to informants are as common investigative tool. Critics argue the case stretches criminal law into the oversight of nonprofit tactics, potentially chilling civil rights work. However, the concealment via fake entities and false statements to banks strengthens the money laundering angle, and the scale, $3 million plus over nearly a decade, suggests more than isolated errors. From the specified lens, fraud as rights violation, objectivism condemns fraud as a form of initiated force, deceiving rational actors into parting with property under false premises. If the SPLC misrepresented fund usage, promising direct opposition to extremists while subsidizing participants, it violated donor consent, property rights. Radical objectivists would demand full restitution and reputational destruction in a free market of ideas. Not state persecution per se, but the exposure validates skepticism of altruistic claims, making self-perpetuation. Anarcho-capitalism view, this is a crony charity at its worst, leveraging tax advantages and government ties to run a protection racket. The hate industry creates demand, fear of extremism, then supplies inflated supply via paid sources, crowding out genuine private defense mechanisms. In a stateless order, such deception would face boycotts, competing watchdogs, and private arbitration far swifter than DOJ processes. Agorist perspective, the use of shell companies and concealed transaction mirrors counter-economics tactics, but directed towards sustaining state-alleged narrative control rather than liberating individuals from it. Algorists celebrate black, gray markets that undermine tyranny. Here, the SPLC's opacity propped up a narrative that justified more state surveillance and deplatforming of dissidents. The revelation underscores the need for radical transparency and voluntary, non-coercive alternatives to monitoring via market reputation and private investigation. This fits a pattern. The SPLC's intelligent prospect generated reports that influence policy, cooperate debanking, and cultural ostracism, often blurring advocacy with enforcement. Post-Charlie Kirk assassination in 2025, scrutiny intensifies over its labeling of conservative groups, with the FBI under prior leadership distancing itself somewhat, only for the current DOJ to pursue financial angles. Why the SPLC qualifies as a criminal organization under this framework. Criminal here transcends narrow positive law, pending trial outcome, to normative evaluation under non aggression and rationality. The SPLC operates as an ideological enterprise that, one, initiates force indirectly by fueling deplatforming, doxing adjacent exposure, and government pressure campaigns against nonviolent actors. It chills free association and speech core to voluntary society. Two, engages in systematic deception. The alleged $3 million scheme, if proven, exemplifies fraud on a grand scale. Even without conviction, the pattern of expansive labeling, endowment hoarding, and selective outrage suggests a business model optimized for revenue over results. Charity evaluators have given it low marks for overhead and impact relative to assets. Three, undermines objective justice by equating ideological disagreement with hate equivalent to Klan violence. It destroys conceptual clarity. Rand warned against anti-conceptual mentalities. The SPLC's approach packages package deal fallacies, looping libertarians or traditionalists with actual racists to smear opponents. Four, perpetuates dependency. It profits from existence of extremism, real or exaggerated, creating perverse incentive akin to fire department that benefits from arson. In an agorist society, individuals would handle threats through private networks without subsidizing the threat vector. Defenders argue informant payments are standard tradecraft for disruption, and some donors approved aggressive messes. This misses the point. Undisclosed redirection of funds breaches fiduciary-like duties in voluntary giving. If donors truly knew and consented, solicitations should be stated it transparently. Market competition would reward honesty. Broader ecosystems each would compound this. The SPLC influenced federal training and data sharing, blurring lines between private advocacy and state power. Under anarcho-capitalism, such fusion is illegitimate. True security emerges from the polycentric law and insurance, not narrative monopolies. Conclusion. Toward voluntary alternatives. The April 2026 indictment, whatever its legal fate, peels back the veneer on an organization long criticized for mission creep into partisan smear operations. Under anarcho-capitalism, radical objectivist, and agorist principles, the SPLC represents the corruption of private initiative by statist incentives and anti-rational ethics. It extracts wealth through alarmism, conceals methods that may sustain the problems it claims to solve, and attacks the individualism that underpins genuine tolerance and rights protection. A free society would replace it with competing private intelligence firms, reputation markets, voluntary arbitration, and armed self-defense, all accountable to paying customers via profit loss signals, not donor guilt or tax shelters. Exposures like the recent charges accelerates market correction. Donors can direct funds, competitors emerge, and rational actors withdraw consent. The ultimate crime is intellectual and moral, the substitution of objective reality and voluntary cooperation with floating abstractions and coercive narrative enforcement. Truth-seeking demands dismantling such edifices, not through state vigilance, but through uncompromising reason, boycotts, and building parallel institutions rooted in consent. The SPLC's model is unsustainable. In a truly free market of ideas, its unmasking is a step towards that reality. Under an anarcho-capitalist, radical objectives, and agorist lens, the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC hate map, represents a paradigmatic case of private narrative entrepreneurship detached from objective reality, voluntary consent, and the non-aggression principle. It functions not as a neutral monitoring of initiated force of fraud, but as a tool of conceptual package dealing, equating ideological disagreement, speech, or voluntary association with hate equivalent to violent criminality. This inflates perceived threats to sustain donor revenue, influencing deplatforming in policy, and undermines rational epistemology, core to Ayn Rand's objectivism, which demands concepts grounded in perceptual facts, not floating abstractions or emotionalist signaling. In a free market, competing private investigators, reputation services, and insurance firms would evaluate threats based on demonstrated aggression. The SPLC's model, shielded by tax-exempt status, crowds out such accountability. Official SPLC methodology, sources, criteria, and process. The SPLC's Intelligent Projects compiles the annual hate map and accompanying year-end hate or extremist reports. through a multi-source process. Data comes from hate group publications, websites, and social media, citizen reports, tips, and field sources, law enforcement agencies, news or media reports, the SPLC's own investigations and monitoring, including web scraping and direct observation activities like rallies, marches, flyering, speeches, meetings, or publishing literature. A group qualifies as active if it shows documented activity in the prior year. Purely online entities, cyberspace only, are generally excluded unless they manifest real-world presence to avoid inflating counts with the vaporous self-promoters. Chapters or local affiliates of larger organizations are often counted separately, providing geographic granularity. The map visualizes approximate locations, statewide or local, allows filters by ideology, IG, white nationalist, anti-LGBT, anti-immigrant, anti-government, general, and tracks trends over time. E.g., 2024 data showed 1,371 total hate and anti-government extremist groups. The core definition of a hate group per SPL statements, an organization or collection of individuals that, based on its official statements or principles, the statements of its leaders or its activities, has beliefs or practices that attack or malign an entire class of people, typically for their immutable characteristics. Explicitly, violence or criminal conduct is not required. Speech beliefs, practices deemed to demonize, dehumanize, spread falsehood, or involve crude name-calling and disparaging propaganda suffice. Categories include the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, racist skinhead, Christian identity, neo-Confederate, black separatist, later reconstructed into other ideologies like the anti-Semitism for equity, anti-LGBT, anti-Muslim, and more. Anti-government groups form a parallel track, often overlapping with patriot or militia movements. Methodology updates occur in 2020. The SPLC collapsed the standalone black separatist category, redistributing groups to better reflect power dynamics and foreground white supremacist threats. Flyering maps supplement the main map, tracking propaganda incidents via social media, news, and tips. The process repeats yearly. Inactive groups drop off. SPLC emphasizes this as one barometer of extremism, not exhaustive, and distinguishes Hate Watch investigating reporting from the map itself. Epistemological and ethical flaws. Floating abstractions and package dealing. From a radical objectivist perspective, the methodology fails at the root. It severs hate from objective reference and reality. Rand's theory of concepts requires hierarchical integration for percepts. Rights violations involve initiated physical force or fraud against individuals. The SPLC's approach treats ideas as existential threats if they challenge progressive priors on race, gender, immigration, or sexuality. Labeling opposition to same-sex marriage, biological sex distinctions in policy, or open borders as maligning immutable characteristics conflates voluntary persuasion with coercion. This is anti-conceptual. Its package deals actual Klan violence, bombing, lynchings with think tanks, parental right groups, or Christian organizations expressing reasoned disagreement. No objective standard distinguishes disparaging propaganda from legitimate critique. Evaluators apply subjective cultural left filters. Critics document how this leads to overcounting and asymmetry. Counting chapters or loose affiliate inflates numbers, e.g. multiple Klan factions or local patriot groups. Mainstream entities land on the map for ideological dissent. Family Research Council, FRC, for traditional marriage views, Moms for Liberty for parental rights and education, Center for Immigration Studies for policy analysis, even scientific scrutiny groups like SEGM, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, for questioning youth medical transitions on evidentiary grounds. Recent additions include Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk, and Focus on the Family. The map disproportionately targets right-leaning or conservative viewpoints while downplaying or reclassifying left-associated extremism. SPLC claims power dynamics justify emphasis on white supremacist threats, but these imports collectivist assumptions antithetical to individualism. Objectivism judges individuals by their actions and ideas, not group ancestry or mutable traits. Immutable characteristics rhetoric itself floats. Sexuality, gender dysphoria, debates, or cultural practices involve volitional events, not purely perceptual facts like race, classical Klan ideology. Anarcho-capitalism critique. In a stateless society, private defense agencies, arbitrators, and insurers assess real risks via evidence or aggression. The SPLC's map serves as a de facto blacklist, feeding corporate, tech, government debanking, non-platforming, and training materials. Indirect force enabled by state-adjacent privileges, tax exemption, historical law enforcement ties. It creates self-reinforcing market distortion. Alarmist counts justify more funding, 787 million plus assets historically, which sustains broader labeling. Real threats, actual violence, would face market consequences, boycotts, private security responses, restitution demands without narrative monopoly. Agorist view, the methodology relies on gray area sourcing, tips with extremists, media amplification, and opacity in editorial decisions. Shell-like informant tactics tied to the 2026 DOJ indictment allegations echo counter-economics, but perverted towards sustaining state-aligned cultural reinforcement rather than withdrawing from it. Donors voluntary fund it, but misrepresentation of fighting hate while allegedly subsidizing sources breaches consent, a form of fraud. Practical consequences and real-world impact. The map's influence extends beyond symbolism. It has shaped FBI DOJ training until severed ties in 2025 and bias concerns. Corporate policies and media narratives. Designated groups report heightened harassment, venue cancellation, and security costs. High-profile cases. A 2012 shooter targeted FRC after consulting the map. Post-2025 scrutiny intensifies after the Kirk assassination and SPLC's labeling of parental immigration voices. Legal challenges, e.g. defamation suits by Dustin Inman Society, often falter on opinion protections, but reveal limited discovery into internal processes. Numbers fluctuate. IG peaks around 1,000 plus hate groups, with anti-government adding hundreds, but critiques argue inflation via ideological creep, not organic growth and violence. FBI hate crime stats, voluntary incomplete, show no proportional explosion matched SPLC counts. Broader victimization, surveys exist but suffer reporting gaps. SPLC defends the approach as transparent monitoring without implying violence endorsement, yet the absence of violence requirement, combined with expansive categories, turns the map into a tool for social ostracism, untethered from objective harm. Alternatives in a free society. Under the specified lens, genuine threat assessment belongs to voluntary markets, competing intelligence firms publishing verifiable data on aggression, crimes, frauds, reputation platforms scoring groups by actions, not beliefs, insurance pricing risks, actuary, private arbitration enforcement contracts against force, fraud, individuals exercise reason to evaluate ideas, dissent on policy or philosophy, merits, debate, not smears. Agorists would build parallel institutions withdrawing consent from narrative cartels. The SPLC hate map methodology, broad sourcing married to subjective maligning standards, exemplifies how tax-privileged nonprofits can weaponize floating abstractions for resource extractions and cultural control. It erodes conceptual clarity, chills free association, and prioritizes alarm over rational evaluation of rights violations. Exposure via scandals, indictments, and competing analysis accelerates market correction. Rational actors reject it for transparent, evidence-based alternatives rooted in objective reality and voluntary exchange. In a truly free order, such edifices collapse under their own contradictions. Truth-seeking demands replacing them with institutions accountable to reason and consent. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video.